Just hours after returning from Africa, Rex Tillerson is ousted as U.S. Secretary of State and replaced by the head of the CIA. The Me Too and Time's Up movements dominate the agenda as thousands of women meet at the United Nations. And how Tanzanians are fueling the cook stove market with homegrown energy. We meet the man behind the buzz. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. President Donald Trump has ousted his Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and replaced him with CIA Director Mike Pompeo. News broke just hours after Tillerson returned to Washington from a trip to Africa. In a Tuesday morning tweet, President Trump thanked Tillerson for his service and announced that Pompeo would take over the job. He also said Deputy Director of the CIA, Gina Haspel, would now become chief of the agency, the first woman to hold that position. Before boarding Air Force One for his first visit to California, President Trump said he and Pompeo had a very good relationship. Trump also wished Tillerson well, saying he and Tillerson had talked about the possibility of Tillerson's departure for some time. Trump said he and Tillerson had gotten along well, but also disagreed on certain things. The president said he does not see that happening with Pompeo.
I think Mike Pompeo will be a truly great Secretary of State. I have total confidence in him. And as far as Rex Tillerson is concerned, I very much appreciate his commitment and his service, and I wish him well.
Well, Trump said he and Tillerson had a different mindset on certain things. Now, Tillerson had just returned from a 5-nation trip to Africa, which he cut short by a day to return to Washington. For more on Tillerson's exit and how that affects U.S. Africa policy, I'm joined in studio by Stephen Herman, VOA's White House correspondent, and Melvin Foote, President and Chief Executive Officer, Constituency for Africa. Welcome, gentlemen.
Pleasure.
Now, let's start with you, Steve. First, the president said they have a difference in their mindset. Can you kind of break this down for us?
Well, I think that Tillerson's days were numbered ever since it leaked out that he had called the President of the United States a moron. Actually, there was another word before moron we won't repeat on television. And I think that the President was just looking to get everything set up, and Tillerson had to know that his days were numbered. But in a sense, this was a very humiliating way for him to go. From what we're hearing from officials at State Department, that Tillerson had no warning and heard about his firing from the president's tweet this morning.
There's some actually who had expected him to quit at some point. Is there some kind of understanding as to why he held on for this long until he gets fired?
There have also been people at State Department who said that Tillerson had decided that he would not quit. No matter what the humiliation was, he would make the president fire him.
Wow. Now, Mel, looking at the timing itself, he just returned from Africa. We were trying to read into the U.S. policy towards Africa from his trip. What do you make of this?
Well, it can't be good. I mean, you know, from the African perspective, they got to be saying, wait a minute, is the United States serious or not? And this was a clear indication after the comment he made, the derogatory comment he made last month, that he's not serious. I wonder about the Africa Union chairperson, you know, who had to cancel a visit to Washington a few months ago because they downgraded it here in Washington. And now you shake hands and say, okay, everything is forgiven, let's move forward. And then here we go again. So in my view, it clearly shows that Africa is not a priority for the United States. It clearly shows there's no real policy priority as of right now in terms of the administration. So it's not good.
Now, Steve, talking about the timing, what might have triggered this firing at this particular time?
Well, from what we can tell, as of yesterday, this was being discussed in the White House, that it would occur sometime this week. The Washington Post got wind of it, as did other reporters, but the Post had a story out early in the morning, and shortly after that is when the president tweeted. So they may have decided to pull the trigger on this once the story was out in the Washington Post and not let it to fester. Now, we can also look at the comment that Secretary Tillerson made about the nerve gas attack in Salisbury in the United Kingdom, where he went beyond the White House statement and clearly put the blame on Russia, where Sarah Huckabee Sanders at the briefing that we were in yesterday used words to condemn the attack, but did not point the finger at Russia, saying it was premature.
How about that case of the Tillerson kind of getting the news about the potential meeting by the president with the North Korean leader while in Africa?
Right. There's no doubt that the Secretary of State had been out of the loop on the North Korean negotiations, and that was very much something that the president decided on his own, on the spot, when the South Koreans were in the Oval Office, without consulting his Secretary of State. But that was more of a humiliation, again, for Tillerson rather than a reason to fire him.
Now, Mel, looking forward, what do you think the Trump administration could do to kind of give that confidence that it really cares about the continent of Africa?
Well, I think that we're way behind the 8 ball. I think China has left us in the dust. I think Russia is moving really aggressively in Africa. I think I don't see a way forward, quite frankly. I don't. And I try to be optimistic about it. I try to be balanced about it.
But now the former Secretary of State, before going to Africa, said, well, we want to have a kind of a more progressive relationship with Africa. China has this kind of different relationship which doesn't help the continent. Was it that signaling that the U.S. wants to engage in a better way?
Well, over the last, say, a decade, I've heard mixed signals. I heard that while China was building infrastructure, we're doing social programming. It's okay, it's okay. Now we talk about security. Now we're talking about guns, military. I just think that we don't have a clue as to where we're going with Africa. I think that we're misleading Africans. We're not telling them, not even in terms of the Young African Leaders Program. We're not saying, yeah, we want to build future partnerships. I don't hear anything that says we have a good, coherent strategy relating to Africa.
Is there anything the U.S. is losing by not engaging with Africa more effectively?
I think we're losing all kinds. I think we're losing market share. I think we're losing future world relationships. I think we're losing climate change initiatives. I think we're losing globally. Healthcare security, I think we're losing globally.
Now, Steve, finally, with this exit, people kind of expect others to happen someday. How is the atmosphere like? What do you hear in terms of people working around the White House and for the president?
Well, the president is very confident, feels that he should be in charge of all the initiatives, that people should follow his orders, his direction, and that with Tillerson's leaving, we could now see a number of other people leaving as well, that the president feels emboldened with taking this move, that he may also want to remove some other senior personnel as well.
Right. Final word in 10 seconds.
Yeah, I agree. I ditto.
All right. So we'll wait and see how things play out in the coming days. Gentlemen, I want to thank you very much, Steve and Mel.
Thank you.
All right. Well, do appreciate Steve Hammond, VOA's White House correspondent, and Melvin Foot, who's the president and chief executive officer, Constituency for Africa. Now, 4,000 women from around the world are gathering at the United Nations for the Commission on the Status of Women. The two-week-long conference is focusing on the challenges facing rural women and girls. VOA United Nations correspondent Margaret Bashir has more.
Rural women and girls lag behind their urban sisters on many fronts.
By any reckoning, they are often the furthest behind. Their access to basic services like health and education often shame us. Their treatment in some of our justice systems need fundamental transformation. Poverty and violence in rural areas is a blight on the lives of women and girls and stops them from realizing anything like their true potential.
Some 400 million women worldwide work in the agriculture sector. They are especially vulnerable to sexual assault and other abuses.
They plant, pick, and pack the food that we eat. Their work is vital. It gives us life. And while their work is so vital to our lives, their lives are under constant threat. Farm worker women are invisible to most people, and it's this invisibility that makes them vulnerable to exploitation, discrimination, and the violence that is perpetrated against them.
The Me Too and Time's Up movements fighting sexual assault and harassment in the workplace will also be part of the conference discussion.
Rape affects a woman in a similar way, whether she's raped in Hollywood or in the Congo or in India, the pain is the same. When we win together and we liberate all women, we will be able to make the changes that will last.
In addition to finding ways to empower rural women and girls, the conference will address the challenges and possibilities for achieving gender equality.
Gender equality is one unfinished business of our time, and so the time is now to change it.
Over the next 2 weeks, the Army of Women here plan to do just that. Margaret Bashir, VOA News, the United Nations.
Well, many Africans use charcoal for their cooking, but over the years, the effect has been disastrous for the continent's forests. In Tanzania, a new homegrown energy-saving cook stove fueled entirely with gas has communities buzzing. Africa 54's Paul Ndiho spoke to the inventor and filed this report.
A revolutionary gas stove invented in Tanzania has won several international ingenuity awards. The stove has transformed the lives of people living in several impoverished communities in the East African country. Now, orders for the gas stove are arriving from across the country and beyond. Here is a quick demonstration of the product.
I will start with the first process of how to release the gas. Make sure that everything is connected very well, like this. Now this bolt holds the tank in place. As you can see, the cooker is ready for cooking.
Humility is what describes Innocent Kazungu, a self-taught engineer with inventions in a wide variety of pursuits, including office carpet, a gas flat iron box, a heavy vacuum cleaning machine, and environmentally friendly paper bags. He has a remarkable ability to use locally sourced materials to invent products, despite repeated hardships.
In the place where I live, there is a woman who sells charcoal. Someone came to buy charcoal worth 2,000 Tanzania shillings. The amount she got was minimal, and she started complaining that it was not enough to cook with. That's where I started having this idea. She was saying some of us cannot buy gas tanks, so what do?
Kazungu is part of a new breed of young African innovators. He says that in his community, families spend hours looking for firewood, bending over hot, smoky charcoal stoves, preparing their meals. And this has ignited his interest to come up with a solution that is cheap and user-friendly. Innocent Kazungu spent several months working on a prototype for the cooker, a process that wasn't easy. The stove is entirely made out of scrap metal found in the slums around Dar es Salaam. Since the introduction of the gas stove, it's become a hit in the city. Martha Mukunde is a local businesswoman interested in buying the product.
I think I will start with 10 pieces first and see if the market will accept the product. Then I think I will continue to sell more of them, but for now I want to make order for 10 pieces.
Mary Mwandre, a resident of Dar es Salaam, says that this stove will have a significant impact on the community.
For sure, we are very inspired with what he's doing. He's doing something which is very talented, something which is, you can see it is deep inside him.
Kazungu hopes to use this platform to network and scout out for potential investors. For a young man whose dreams are big, the sky is the limit on his ideas and inventions. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
Well, joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Madu. What do you have for us today, Lino?
Vincent, an outbreak of Lassa fever has killed 110 people in Nigeria, and with 18 of the country's 36 states affected, the World Health Organization is calling it an unprecedented outbreak. Lassa fever is a viral hemorrhagic illness. It is mainly transmitted to humans through food or household items that have been contaminated with rodent urine or excrement. The disease can also be transmitted through the bodily fluids of those infected. Symptoms of Lassa virus include fever, headaches, and in the most severe cases, death. Health authorities have set up centers in 4 states to manage the outbreak, but health facilities are particularly overstretched in the southern states of Edo, Ondo, and Ebonyi, where authorities are mobilizing doctors and nurses. Now, cold sores, many people know about them. The tiny fluid-filled fever blisters that develop on or around the lips. If you're lucky enough to never have had them, these blister-like lesions can not only appear on your lips, but on your chin, cheeks, inside your nostrils, and less frequently on the roof of the mouth. But what causes cold sores? Experts say the most common cause is the herpes simplex type 1 virus, or HSV1. And sometimes the herpes simplex type 2 virus, however, or HSV2, according to Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, 50 to 80% of adults in the United States have cold sores or oral herpes. Oral herpes is most commonly transmitted by kissing or sharing drinks or utensils. Health experts say other top infectious viruses that can easily be spread through kissing include mononucleosis, the common cold, and flu. Now, for more on the subject, we are joined in our New York studios by Georgia Pasadis. She's a pharmacist and nutraceuticals, meets pharmaceuticals integration expert. Ms. Pasadis, welcome to the program. Tell us about the cold sore and how common it is. It seems to be very common, actually.
It is actually. According to the World Health Organization, 2/3 of our population globally has HSV1 or has been exposed to it. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody in their lifetime will get an outbreak, but it is very common.
So how can one prevent it?
So when you typically see a fever blister or a cold sore, which is caused by the virus, it looks like a little cluster of little blisters. It's usually around the nose, the mouth. Some people also get it inside the mouth, but it's typically somewhere in the orbital area around the mouth or the nose.
And what are the treatment options?
So I'm actually a cold sore sufferer myself, and I use 2 different products. I use Abio, which is a cold sore treatment gel, and you can use that up to 3 to 4 times a day when you get the actual fever blister or the cold sore. And you can use something like lysine. Lysine you can take all year round to actually help reduce the amount of outbreaks that you get, and that's just an amino acid. And it's also very important to boost your immune system, taking things like vitamin C, vitamin D, and making sure that you're really keeping a very healthy diet can help the outbreaks throughout the year.
Are there some alternative ways, perhaps natural products that you could recommend?
Yes, I think vitamins. Vitamins are a great resource that you can get over the counter that are natural options. There are organic options, preservative-free options, and those really work on boosting the immune system, those natural options. Like I said before, something like a vitamin C or a vitamin D. You can get these in multivitamin capsules as well if you don't want to take multiple pills. But there are over-the-counter vitamins that you can take that really focus on boosting your immune system so that way you don't get as many outbreaks.
What is mononucleosis? I have to say, when I heard about this, I was really surprised.
Yes, so mono is what we used to think of as the kissing disease. You know, high schoolers and middle schoolers would get it, but actually mono, anybody can get it, and it's very common this time of the year, and it really presents itself like a cold. It's caused by a virus called the Epstein-Barr virus, and you can get this by somebody coughing or sneezing near you that has it, or even by kissing them.
And how do you prevent them?
Typically, your symptoms are very similar to something like the flu or the cold, where you might get body aches, you're very fatigued, you might be coughing and sneezing, but typically you might just have a fever and you're getting body aches, and you most likely will have something like mono or the flu. But if you are feeling any additional symptoms, like you're having pain in your abdominal area, it could be something like an enlarged spleen, which is a complication of mono. So that's something that you should definitely go see a physician for.
So very quickly, how can one avoid viruses that are transmitted through kissing, besides avoiding kissing?
Other than avoiding kissing, you can do things like making sure you have good hand washing techniques. So washing your hands thoroughly, singing something like the Happy Birthday song when you wash your hands is very helpful. Not just doing a quick hand wash. A good 30 to 60 seconds washing your hands is very effective. It helps rid your hands of the viruses, which is how we spread a lot of them. And also making sure that you're using proper, sneezing and coughing technique, making sure that you're not sneezing and coughing out into the public.
Okay, Georgia Pasadis, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And that was Georgia Pasadis speaking to us from New York. Now, a brain implant to decode complex speech signals could soon be a reality, and it will give people who have lost the ability to speak the power to be heard again. Faith Lapidus has more.
Researchers have created a variety of brain-computer interfaces that control all sorts of assistive physical devices. They allow paralyzed people to move their fingers and give amputees motor control over prosthetic arms and hands. Now, a team in Spain is working on a brain implant to give people with brain injuries their voice back.
What we are trying to develop are neural interfaces, a new generation of neural interfaces based on graphene that are capable of reading and mapping brain activity, with the ultimate goal of to restore communication and speech in patients with severe speech disabilities.
Graphene, a wonder material that is just 1 atom thick, is strong, highly flexible, electrically conductive, and transparent, making it ideal for interpreting complex patterns of neural activity.
So the idea is to be able to record the activity in the motor cortex related to the articulation, to the speech, and being able to decode that signal and then send it to a speech synthesizer.
Testing in animals has so far managed to restore vocalization in brain-damaged mice. Interpreting human brain signals is much more complex, but researchers say clinical trials will begin in 3 years. I'm Faith Lapidus, VOA News.
And that's our health report for today, so stay in touch for more. Find me on Twitter @LenorMoudou. Back to you, Vincent.
Wow. Thank you very much for joining us today, Lenore. I'll be sure to watch for Lenore Moudou every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54 for the latest health news in Africa. And we proceed now. It's time for a short break. It's still to come on Africa 54, cyberculture in a globalized world. We'll discuss the impact on Africa. We'll be right back.
How do you see the world?
I see countries in turmoil.
I see our planet changing.
I see people at peace.
No matter how you see the world, you'll get an unbiased and uncensored view of it on Voice of America. On television, radio, online, and mobile. In more than 40 languages all day, every day. Millions of people tune us in.
How do I see the world? On Voice of America.
Now, much has been said and written about the impact of globalization on Africa. We live in the digital age, and increasingly our globalized world is being shaped by cyberculture. It's all under the spotlight in a new book, Globalization and Cyberculture, an Afrocentric Perspective. The book looks at what happens when Western and African cultures merge through digital communication and how that affects development on the continent. Now, the author is Kebuma Langmia. He's a Fulbright Scholar, Professor, and Chair in the Department of Strategic, Legal, and Management Communications at Harvard University. Professor Langmia, welcome to Africa 54.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So a very intriguing book, in fact, I have to say, Globalization and the whole question of cyberculture. First, share with us in a more simplified way, what are we trying to talk about here? It's how you communicate and how communication in this cyber world can breach the gaps that have been there, that promote stereotypes between the Western and African culture?
Yeah, thank you so much. I just want to, first of all, thank you for welcoming me into this program. Yes, I'm looking at communication that used to be in Africa and the kind of communication that we are now facing with. And the digital modes of communication that has come like an earthquake or a tsunami, transforming the way Africa used to communicate prior to colonization or missionaries, or prior to the digital age. So I'm saying that the culture has actually been completely shattered. And there has to be a way in order to bridge the communication that used to be in Africa and the communication that we are used to today.
Now, are you saying there's something negative about that, or you can blend the two in order to get something that is still very effective and beneficial, but that retains both the traditional way of communication and embracing the modern way of communication?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of negativity which is accompanying these modes of communication. Remember, Cheikh Anta Diop used to say that no nation can ever develop by using the language of another nation. Whether we like it or not, English and French and Portuguese are the languages that we are now using in Africa, and this is a language in the digital age. And so the traditional African languages are suffering because of that. One. Two, the idea of media literacy, the idea of cybercultural techniques are only being mastered by those who've gone to school. Those in the urban areas, those in the rural areas are absent. That's why we talk about a digital divide. The digital divide is one of the issues that is actually eating up the African communication sphere.
How do we reduce that space?
In order to reduce that space, there's something that we always call hybridization. In other words, some kind of education, some kind of preparation for those who have been left in the periphery, letting them know that, look, you can still include African culture, African languages in this digital age, which is not the issue. Look at texting. You can only text using those languages, or you try as much as possible.
Yeah. You do talk in your book about a hybridity of Western and African cultures. I presume this is blending them together and finding a way, a middle ground.
Yes. And that is the only way forward. And one of the issues that I discuss in the book is looking at ways where we can at least bring in those African cultural communication techniques. And there is cyber subculture that I discussed in the book, where we have issues like the Midzit in South Africa, or we have the Kokoliko in Ghana, or the Niger Power. These are also social media platforms within the internet that are being used by folks of these countries. They may use their local languages, or they may use Pidgin or Creole in order to communicate. That's the hybridity. That's the only way we can at least move forward in this digital age.
Yes.
Because if we completely consume the Western modes of communication, then there is dire need for African culture in this digital age.
This is going to be a longer conversation. We must continue this another time. I want to thank you very much for coming on today.
Thank you so much.
And sharing your insights with us. Professor Langmere, Kebuma Langmere of Howard University. And that's our show for today. Thanks a lot and have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. Today's episode won't cost you anything.
Freebie.
Let's see what this one is about.
Anna, I love my job.
Oh yeah? Why is that?
I get so many freebies from the bands I write about. CDs, t-shirts, water bottles, even tickets to see them perform.
Wow. The only freebie I ever got from my